incarnation. This is time for us as a church to be his hands and to be his feet, to stop simply talking about Christ and begin to live as Christ, to be his light. Listen, let me ask you this. If you're a believer, you're a Christ follower here today, and maybe you're not a Christ follower, man, I'm glad you're here today. Praise God that you're here. But maybe you are. I'm talking just to Christ followers today right here in this part. If you're a Christ follower here today, can I ask you a question? Has anybody ever been amazed by your life? I'm not talking about where you live, the home you have, the car you drive, the job you go to work, the professional accolades, your sales goals, your body, your good looks. I'm not talking about all those things. I'm talking about, has anyone ever been amazed by your life? Say, Bill, what do you mean? Has God ever been so alive in you that everywhere you go and everything you do, Jesus is there? You see him, you smell him, someone tastes him. It's that moment where somebody looks at you and says, man, this girl at my work, man, she dresses, she looks like me, she works in the same building, but there's something different about this girl. I can't explain it. Or maybe it's you where a guy says, you know what, man, every time this guy, he comes and he shares something about his life and what's going on, man, I can relate to this guy. And it's like, man, it's like God is just talking through this guy to me. Has anyone ever been amazed by his life coming out of your life? See, maybe the reason why Austin is 92% unchurched, fathom that. 92% of Austin this morning, not in any place at all. The reason why Austin is 92% unaffected by the Christ that we proclaim, could it be because the church has ceased to be what the Christ intended the church to be? An authentic, life-giving, incarnational community of believers, listen, who are willing to do whatever it takes to go wherever he would go to be the hands and feet of Christ, to reach far from God people right where they're at. Are we not supposed to be the ones who've been called to be the walking display for Christ of his life-changing power? Are we not the ones who's supposed to have the answer for all those who are searching and hurting around us? Then why is that not happening here in Austin, Texas? Could it be the maybe reason why that what we say we believe with our mouth is not being lived out of how we live our life? There's an author, Brennan Manning. I want you to read this. He says this as to why a lost world finds little hope in Christianity today. And here's what he says. The greatest single cause of atheism today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips and they walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. You see, that's what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. That we can sit here and we can talk about how great our God is, but if you look at our lives, it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't match up. See, he can affect me on Sunday morning sitting in a pew, but it doesn't affect me when I have to make that choice of being with integrity or not at my workplace, or when I get on the computer, or when I have a chance to gossip about somebody else. Listen, if we're going to be an irresistible influence in Austin, Texas for the glory of God, it's time for us as a community of faith to start embracing the lost around us right where they are. To begin to see what Jesus sees, be willing to go where Jesus goes, be willing to walk where Jesus would walk, and that we might be his feet and his hands to a generation that is searching, to a city that is hopelessly lost and searching. Which brings me to this point this morning. What if? What if God decided in 2008 to come in the flesh again? Where would he go? I mean, what would this Jesus do? What would he think? Who would he go to? And see, here's the question I want us to think about today. What would he say? What would God say? Take your Bibles. I want us to see this in John chapter 1 this morning. John chapter 1. I'll give you a chance to turn there in your word. I think if you're here today, maybe you don't have a Bible, there should be one right there behind or in front of you in the pew. John's in the New Testament. It's about 3 or 4 books into the New Testament gospel. And so if you're here today, you don't have a Bible, man, feel free to take one. Let's read this together. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God, and He was in the beginning with God. Kind of have to just stop after that, don't you? All things came into being through Him. And apart from Him, nothing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life. And this life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. And then verse 14. And the Word became flesh. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen His glory. The glories of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace, full of truth. If God could say anything to you this morning, what would He say? What would He say about why He came? There's a couple statements I want to make to you this morning. First is this. If God could say anything to you this morning, what would He say? I think He'd say this. I am enough for you. I am enough for you. See, there's no doubt today that we live in a day and an age of great uncertainty. Man, every single day it seems like there's a new catastrophic event coming on the horizon. Even this past week we saw terrorism in India, hundreds killed. Westerners just dragged out. I saw a father and a son, or a father and his daughter that were murdered. We see wars, we see natural disasters, we see murders, we see global economies sinking into recessions, and the list goes on. But listen, all those things being said, listen, there's a greater problem we face in America today, and it has nothing to do with our housing markets, has nothing to do with our unemployment rates, has nothing to do with who's running the government. See, I think the greatest problem we face in America today is this inflated view of self. It's all about me. It's all about me. This inflated view of self. See, I think we've lost our vision of God, and we have ceased to see the greatness and the majesty and the glory of our God. See, we weren't created, listen to me, you were not created to make much about you. You were created, as we're going to see in a second, by God and for God to make much about Him, for His glory. See, I believe most of us need today is not another economic stimulus package, not another discretionary money to spend on ourselves. What we need today is a bigger vision of our God, to live in light of who our God is. And I believe what God is trying to say to us this morning through this gospel is this, is I am enough for you. Look here in these first 3 verses of John's gospel. You'll begin to see not only a clear and concise picture of who Christ is, but I also believe God begins to communicate something about one of life's greatest mysteries. In the beginning, God. Look at this. John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And He was in the beginning with God. See, listen, if we're ever going to live in light of the greatness of God, we have to understand, we have to have a right view of who this Jesus was. Because listen, when you have Jesus in your life, it changes everything. It changes who you are. It changes how you live. It changes how you love. Jesus changes everything. His life changes everything. So there's a couple things you need to understand about this life in John. Jesus Christ, first of all, it says that Jesus Christ is eternal and has eternally always existed. Look at it. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and He was in the beginning with God. Do you understand the significance of that statement? Meditate on that for a moment. That there had